people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Sante, why you see us? Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.
Hello, this is Robin Walker. I'm the Black History Man. This is Kush Communiversity, and class is in session. The presentation is called The West African Empire of Ghana. The ruler of Ghana was the richest king on the face of the earth. West Africa is the center of where it's at in terms of economic activity. On the earth, West Africa is where it's at.
Kush Communiversity is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, The Black Secret. Are you ready to dive deep into Black history, economics, wealth building, and self-empowerment? The Black Secret is offering exclusive courses by none other than the Black history man himself, Robin Walker. This is the most powerful Black studies course on offer for the entire Black world. And guess what? You can get started today by simply using our special link, which you can find in the video description. Be sure to apply our coupon code Kimbunga to get another 20% off your membership. And there's more. Want to get a taste of what the Black Secret has to offer? You can also claim the book 100 Black History Facts absolutely free. Link in the description. So what are you waiting for? Expand your mind, unlock a world of knowledge, claim your free book, and let the Black Secret guide you on a journey of discovery and empowerment.
Click on the link below or subscribe to get more information. Class is in session.
Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Mudzimu Mokoro. We give praises unto our great ancestors because our ancestors are worthy to be praised. And in that spirit, we greet thee in the spirit of Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodiye, African power and African liberation for all African people. We are here, brothers and sisters. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. On this near day, Thursday, the 3rd of the month called October, which should have been, as indicated by the prefix Oct, the 8th month of the year. But you know, those Roman emperors, brothers and sisters, you know, they have a tendency to play with time. You know what I mean? So now the 8th month of the year, as far as the Gregorian calendar, is the 10th month of the year. Well, that's why, you know, one of the unique, you know what I mean, eccentricities of being governed by time as defined by Western imperialism, brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? That's a sort of thing. It's a peculiar, reality where we live under right here now. But greetings, welcome, and we appreciate your presence here today, brothers and sisters. We are going to get into our topic with Elder Cecil Gutsmore, African diaspora culture, the Afrikan-Caribbean, and the Smaditisation. Yes, Mr. The Smaditisation of our people, brothers and sisters. Because we have to know that we are Smadi. You know what I mean? And someone will know that we are Smadi. So we need Smaditisation of and among our people. But before we bring forward Elder Cecil, want to make sure that we do inform you of the African World Special Edition, which is the War Report, brothers and sisters. Excellent, articles, both historical analysis and contemporary analysis of certain events and uprisings and protests and demonstrations that are taking place across the African world and their connection to each other, brothers and sisters. You can get this absolutely free in the description to the video right here now. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So make sure that you do that. Also want to let you know about the fact that we apologize for having to postpone the African Survival Initiative Roundtable, brothers and sisters, that was scheduled for the 28th of September. But we have postponed until the 12th of October. So we'll be with you on the 12th of October with the US government versus Black people. We're going to be looking at the domestic policies of the US of A in recent years, specifically in light of the coming presidential election, brothers and sisters, next month in November. Following that, 2 weeks' time, we're going to be having a session looking at US foreign policy, how the US is going to relate to African people of the world. And so that roundtable on the 26th of October will look at foreign policy. Then at the end of November, there's going to be an election roundup. We're going to be looking at the results of the election and what that means for Africans in the USA and around the world. So do stay tuned for more from the Jikola Kimbunga Brotherhood, brothers and sisters, and the African Survival Initiative roundtables. Yeah. Shout out to the brothers and sisters, so the brothers of Jikola Kimbunga, you know what I'm saying, in particular, brother Sam P.K. Collins, with who I'm working very closely to coordinate this situation. Yeah. We also want to remind you of the fact that you can watch the relaunch of the Kush Communiversity is here, brothers and sisters, and we've kicked it off in fine style with the Black History Man himself, the People's Professor, Robin Walker. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. And along with this launch, this relaunch, we are offering you 20% off of your membership of Robin Walker's institution, in which he has 55 hours, brothers and sisters, 55 hours of recorded course content, specially for you and the benefit of our community, brothers and sisters. And if you know Robin Walker, there are very few, if any, better comprehensive teachers of African history from ancient to modern times. And so you will be dutifully educated by an expert in the field. And the link for taking advantage of this is in the description to the video. Also, make sure you use our link because that's we are an affiliate of the blacksecret.com, brothers and sisters. The Black Secret, which is the educational institution of which Robin Walker is a director. And so we look forward to you all jumping on the course material and coming forward and letting us know how that has benefited and empowered you in your life, brothers and sisters. But the Black Secret is the official sponsor for the Kush Communiversity, and so we appreciate the Black Secret, and we appreciate you for joining the Black Secret, and who are quietly, as they say, empowering the community. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, I do believe I've done the housekeeping duties, so I want to remind you to like up the video, hit the like button as you come through, and share the video far and wide, broader than Broadway, brothers and sisters. Look how we're gonna go in today. Yes, indeed. When I say a special shout out to all those who have been commenting on the recent content, and some of you are commenting on the videos themselves. Some of you are sending me messages and emails and whatever, but getting some good feedback from the show that we did last week on Africa Must Unite, looking at the in line with the birthday of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, looking at the concept of African unity in its practical formation, specifically through the work of Nkrumah in the book Africa Must Unite, and what the quote-unquote Union of African States or United States of Africa was supposed to look like, and what problems it was designed to solve. Because oftentimes, in terms of our current day realities, we're often divorced from that historical context and those problems that are heavily mischaracterized in modern day discourse. And so give thanks for the feedback on that. I'm saying people seem to have enjoyed that particular show and the explorations, and also giving thanks for the feedback on the relaunch of the Kush Communiversity as well with brother Robin Walker. Robin Walker, he never fails, he never fails to drop the knowledge, you know what I mean? So we give thanks for that. And also the feedback in relation to our show with Brother Black Panther on African spirituality. And yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, we were blessed to have a discussion on Ojimade Tuesday with Brother Ahmed Kabalo, who is the CEO of African Stream, the Pan-African media institution that has been so thoroughly attacked by the forces of global white imperialism. In this particular instance, the American government and its related corporations, Google, Meta, and etc., brothers and sisters. And a lot of stuff was but we give thanks for Brother Ahmed joining us and breaking down the situation in Sudan in such a beautiful and expert way. A painful situation, but it's beautiful when we can get proper good information and historical context. And so we appreciate Brother Ahmed for coming and providing that, and we appreciate you all for tuning in and sharing your appreciation for what the brother had to share with us on Kimbunga Media. And with that, brothers and sisters, let me bring forward our special guest for this evening's proceedings. Let me bring forward our special guest for this evening's proceedings. Addressing the topic, brothers and sisters, African diaspora culture, the African-Caribbean, and the Smaditisation of our people. Now, I know it's enough only to read this, and I couldn't stop when you see that word there. You say Smaditisation, family, Smaditisation, brethren and sisters, and that are the word. And you know, it's an actual fact that most people that speak patois, cannot read it because patois has been confined to a conversational language, brothers and sisters. But studies have been done that if you were to write down patois and give it to a patois speaker, them can't read the word they were up on the page or the screen or whatever. So there's some work that needs to be done in terms of increasing the literary value of our indigenous language as we've evolved it. Languages, I could even say, as we've evolved them in the Caribbean, brothers and sisters. But that's a related topic. We'll see if Elder Cecil goes into that today. With that said, let me bring forward the man of the moment and say tender Mwari greetings to Elder Cecil Gatsmore.
Greetings to you, my brother, and to our millions, I'm sure, of viewers. Good to be with you. And it may be as well for me to begin by trying to get that terrible word out of the way. Those people in our audience who have a memory will recall that in the 60s and 70s, Jesse Jackson, our brother in the United States of America, had a movement. And one of the slogans was, I'm a somebody. I might well remember. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. And the I am somebody was repeated. And that was the essence of the slogan, that no matter what racist United States capitalism is doing to you, you are an African human being. And in the word Smaditisation, of course, comes from one of the many Creole languages, not dialects, that our people in the African world have created. And the word Smadi in Jamaican means somebody. So it's very simple, somebody. And one of our more brilliant intellectuals, the late Rex Nettleford, who was a African-Jamaican intellectual of a considerable order, dressed up the word because he was very learned in the white man's ways. And so he dressed up the word, pulled it out of Jamaican or kept it in Jamaican, but rendered it as Smaditisation. And that's a process whereby African people who, in the context of our presence in the West, and I'll come back to that in a moment, were told that we were nothing and had come from nowhere. And overcoming that is the process of Smaditisation. And it matters that we have a process that needs real examination, because I have here a book which some people will be familiar with called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. It's actually a very good book. My friend, Professor Winston James, has attacked it, but to do with what it does with the Communist Party of the United States of America, not on its main thesis, which is to do with the African culture of the African Americans in 20th century and particularly post First World War United States of America. And I want to say that what we Africans have to understand is not the struggle with the crisis of our intellectuals, and a continuing crisis that certainly is, but the cultural and political achievement of the African masses. So if we focus on that and try to understand that, we put ourselves in the position of knowing what it is that we African people have by way of value, because it is not the intellectuals who've preserved it, but the masses who have preserved, developed, created round what we brought with us from the African continent. Now, there's a reference in the title to the African diaspora. And obviously, Africa has many diasporas. In the first one of them, there's a slow movement of Africans outside of the continent. And through the Ice Age, 30 maybe thousand years ago, there was something of a transformation of human beings, and other types of human beings on the planet developed out of Africans who had moved north. Some people find it hard to believe, given what they became, especially the ones in the ice people of Europe. So there's that very old diaspora. And where America is concerned, I have in my hand, or somewhere here, a book by a brother called David Imhotep, and it says the first Americans were Africans. And there is some truth to that rumor. And so what we need is to recognize that we've had a series of comings, a series of arrivals, if you will, of Africans into the Western continent, the New World, the Americas, so-called, a series of arrivals. So modified Africans, modified by the processes of the differentiation of Homo sapiens into the various races. Those people who eventually arrived in the Americas were undoubtedly modified Africans. And I'll come back in a moment to the reality of what they were culturally, especially by the time they got into the Caribbean islands. But the African presence, when we're not speaking of them, the people that we call Native Americans, but are wondering about whether Africans came directly from the continent or went directly from the continent to the Americas, the truth of the matter is that while it's not quite correct to say in terms of what we understand by the notion African now, which is black skinned, like you and me, my brother, and many of our listeners, if that's what we mean, it may very well not be true that we were the first Americans, but directly from Africa, we were certainly in the Americas much earlier than Columbus. And everybody in the audience should remember that there's a book called They Came, or We Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima, the Guyanese scholar. It matters that there is a reasonably good and deep literature on it. Now, just to drop words and make a little trouble, my very good brethren and grand historian, Robin Walker, I once heard say that you cannot argue for an African presence in the Americas before Columbus without in some way depriving the people that we call Native Americans of their reality. That, in fact, is not true. The two presences matter. Modified human beings arrived across Asia, across the Bering Strait, and over a number of thousands of years spread out through the American continent, not coming at all directly from continental Africa. And then Africans unmodified, who looked like you and me, arrived in the Americas long before Columbus, directly across what we now call the Atlantic Ocean. And I have a book in my hand called The Olmecs, America's First Civilization. And in what is called Mesoamerica, that is that area effectively north of the Panama Canal up to, if you like, Texas. That's Mesoamerica. And in that, let's call it culture complex, the African presence, in the sense of people unmodified by the Ice Age, arrived and did wonderful things. And the Olmec heads are the most famous artifact of that African presence in the Americas. It has been variously studied. Unfortunately, we know as yet too little about exactly how they arrived and when they arrived, but the evidence of their presence, including suggestions of a connection to ancient Egypt, is there in the archaeology, is there in the art, making it crystal clear that Africans of our type, repeat, unmodified by the sojourn through the Ice Ages, were present in America. And there is a significant literature on it. There's for example, the Olmec book, which I just mentioned. This book by Jarvis Boy, there are actually 3 volumes of it, Ancient Egyptians and Chinese in the Americas. And if I had troubled to do some visuals, which I really should have done and maybe should do on some future occasion, the probable connection between the Aztecs and the Mesoamerican peoples who were there before Columbus and at the time of Columbus' arrival, there's clear evidence of a continental African presence, including a Kemetic presence where the architecture suggests in very serious ways that connection. So we Africans have to do more work understanding the pre-Columban African presence in what we now call America. I got the word Smaditisation out of the way, but I also want to touch on and look at that other term in our title, where we're talking about African-Caribbean, because in a very important sense, something wrongful has happened, which is that the United States of America has, for various purposes, captured the notion America. Now, we Africans don't really have an vested interest in it, excepting at the point at which we live there. And we lived there before Columbus, and so we have a vested interest in what was called before the misnamings of the time of Columbus. But we also have a vested interest because all of our presence in the Americas since 1492 makes us, for better or worse, African Americans. And that means that Caribbean Africans, Brazilian Africans, Peruvian Africans, and United States Africans domiciled in those places are African Americans. So African Americans aren't just Africans living in the United States of America. All of us who occupy that double continent and the islands in between are in fact African Americans, and could and should take that concept and use it in whatever way we will. So there is a first arrival, which is to do with modified Africans who came via Asia and the Bering Straits and down through Alaska and all of that stuff. There's a second African presence that produces the Olmec culture and all of that other cultural stuff, which is very well documented and dealt with extensively. Now, our brother Ivan Van Sertima had a good bibliography, which helps you to understand where his material came from. And I myself, living in London decades ago, actually found, I think, all of the bibliographical material that in English that Van Sertima referred to, and it's much of it in the library at Liberty Hall, to which I contributed a significant number of books. So the background to Ivan Van Sertima's scholarship, the books in English part of it can be found in that library. I put them there a decade and a half ago, maybe now almost 2 decades ago. So first the presidents coming down through Alaska, and then the second presidents coming directly across the Atlantic. And then the presence that involves us very directly is that wicked and brutal terroristic genocidal process by which the followers of Christopher Columbus, the followers in Christopher Columbus's shoes, led to a significant genocide, especially in the Caribbean islands, of the native population and their replacement by Africans in a series of agricultural and other alleged enterprises, with the African labor being enslaved labor. And in the Caribbean, and much also of the Central and South America, a significant part of all of the population of all of those countries are people like you and me, descendants of that enslavement process. Now, it matters that the whites in that gigantic domain, geographical area, including those in the United States of America, created what somebody called a pigmentocracy. That is to say, a color hierarchy in which white Europeans were at the top and us Africans were at the bottom. And that was part of the process whereby we were dehumanized. But it's also the case that as mixed race, middle strata of us emerged, and as the idea that nothing black, no good got sold by the powerful forces inside of the situation and historical condition that we found ourselves, there has been some regrettable and to be fought buying into the notion that you can do some improvement of self, physical self, and allegedly also intellectual self, but physical self certainly, get more beautiful by in some way enhancing your color within the color hierarchy, within the pigmentocracy. And it's a regrettable reality. If you go out on the streets of London or the streets of any part of the African diaspora world, you see evidence of the tendency, particularly of the men, to marry lighter skinned African women than themselves. It's kind of a built-in process that you can see it if you go out on the street. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kingston or London or Manchester or wherever. You can actually see it if you look at the black couples. So the wicked and anti-African pigmentocracy seeped into our heads, and it actually negatively affects our consciousness, our choice of partners, our notions of beauty to this day. So the African arrival and the journey during the period of enslavement is, if you like, the third African arrival, the third African diaspora making process that took place across the Atlantic. Leave aside the Eastern diaspora, which, in addition to Africans migrating north out of the continent into Europe and then eventually through the ice ages, some Africans migrated on a southern trajectory, going through Mesopotamia and India and Southeast Asia and Australia and so That is not a diaspora which I'm touching on tonight, but I'm just registering that it's there and that we're not talking about it tonight. There is very good reason why we should know more about it than we do, and there are some books on it, but more needs to be done, and certainly more should be done about tackling it in forums like this on the popular political level. So the third arrival of Africans into the diaspora is enslavement. And then there's a fourth after enslavement, where the Europeans suppressed the so-called slave trade across the Atlantic, which they had instituted and benefited from with the help of a few African sub-partners. And in that 19th century process of eliminating the slave trade, Africans being taken across the Atlantic by the European countries that were still engaged in enslavement, because remember, it happened, the ending of Atlantic enslavement happened over an extended period. The Haitians were the first to liberate themselves on a country-size basis. The French, through their revolution, declared the end of slavery and of enslavement, and then undermined it. The British in 1833, then partial freedom in 1834, and then full free, as our ancestors called it, in 1838. But after that, the French and Dutch still had to free their enslaved. The Spaniards in the Americas still needed to free their enslaved Africans. And Africans in the United States of America, and people don't know this as well as they should, liberated ourselves. It took place in the context of a civil war, but the Civil War happened because the slave states in the South, despite the fact that the North, under Abraham Lincoln, offered them an amendment to the Constitution, which would have meant that they were entitled to keep slavery, the enslaved Africans, in perpetuity, they rejected that compromise and started the war, which they thought they could win. And in fact, they were winning it until the enslaved were freed. And it is the Africans who joined the Union Army who won the Civil War for the North. Up until that point, the South was knocking spots off the Army of the North. And a very other important, Abraham Lincoln gets praised for being the person, and he was, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But Lincoln was no anti-slavery champion. Lincoln believed and said that what he believed in was the Union, and that he was prepared to have the Union half free, as well, that is to say, to keep enslaved Africans in it, as well as any other combination of freedom and unfreedom, as long as the Union was preserved. That is not an anti-slavery position. And so we mustn't believe that Abraham Lincoln was this big anti-slavery anybody. He wasn't. The big anti-slavery people were John Brown, who was white, William Garrison, who was white, Frederick Douglass, who was black, and the biggest anti-slavery voice in 19th century America. One of a brilliant man, somebody that we should look at also on this program as we go forward. So Africans in the period immediately after the end of British and other enslavement systems in the Caribbean were taking Africans to places like Guyana, to places like Trinidad and Tobago, to other places in the Caribbean, and also indeed to Cuba in the 19th century. So there's another pocket of arrival that enriches the quantum, if you will, of surviving and developing African culture amongst the African masses in the Caribbean, not in North America, because no Africans were taken there after slavery ended. On the other hand, enslavement didn't end there formally until 1863, and the liberation process with Africans involved in it continued until 1865, when that war was won by Africans fighting for our ancestral freedom. So Africans continued to be taken into the United States of America until the 1860s, which is 30 years after enslavement ended, longer than that, because we go back to 2008 for the end of the British enslavement trading process across the Atlantic and so on. So some Africans, another, if you like, clump, were taken across the Atlantic to serve in a system of indenture after enslavement, taken onto plantations, etc., 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 but not into slavery. And then we've had one final big arrival, and it's growing, of African diaspora constituting African arrivals, which is what has happened with Africans leaving continental Africa, Africans leaving the Caribbean, Africans leaving parts of Central and South America, and going west and north. So lots of Africans have gone from continental Africa to North America, to the United States, since 1945, and lots have also come to places like France and United Kingdom and Holland and so on. So that's the last, and it's the ongoing diaspora, because some of those people are still coming and going, having children as we ourselves are, and so on. So the diaspora that we're talking about could be not just the enslavement diaspora, but all of those others, but certainly that the diasporas that have, African diasporas in the West that have come into being since 1492, since Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, and Africans had been there before him, etc. But what we now have is the machinery of European power and the machinery of European economics bringing that new continent into the orbit of the European power and European economic machinery. And that's what makes enslavement, that's what makes the elimination of the native peoples of America, and so on. Now, how in those circumstances has African culture been constituted in such a way as to make it legitimately possible for us to speak of the African presence in the Americas having created something that can legitimately be called African diaspora culture? It may be correct to start by saying that if, for example, you look at the Caribbean mentioned in our title, and go and look concretely at the archaeological remains and the archaeological excavations, and there is evidence of an African presence, new Africans like us, not transformed, not Ice Age transformed Africans, in the Caribbean. So that if you look, the most sophisticated society, to use that awful term, the most culturally rich society in the Caribbean islands was in fact in what is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which the native called Haiti. And that was an extraordinary place with a population, as was the case in Jamaica and all of the other islands, and then over on the mainland. There were Africans like us present in those societies at the time that Columbus arrived. And it's important that we just register the quality of those cultures, recognize and state, and it is a fact, that the Spaniards who arrived found these beautiful people and they said they were beautiful and then proceeded to enslave and kill them. Christopher Columbus, when he first landed in the Bahamas, captured and put on his boat 6 natives and wrote in his journal, the journal is available to us, that they are healthy, intelligent people, strong, and ready to be enslaved. The only issue, Your Majesty, is whether they are to be enslaved here, where we found them, or to be taken back to Castile to be enslaved. It actually says that in the first volume of the 4 volumes of the Columbus journal, right? Which was, we only have it because Bartholomew de las Casas copied a set, and that is what has survived. Okay, so Haiti, tremendously, civilized place. The Spaniards were not, apart from militarily, superior to the people they met in the Caribbean in any way, shape, or form. The natives of Haiti had art. They had a wonderful wooden art. They had wonderful gold art. They had wonderful fabric art, and so on. They had a very complex religion with a theology and a cosmogony, if you will, that was considerably richer than the idiotics of Christian theology that the Columbus and his people and their priests brought with them. And let me not open on the limitations of Christian theology. Suffice it to say that the natives of the Caribbean, especially the people of the island of Haiti, now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, were, and it matters that there was a population there of at least 3 million, and the population fell dramatically and very quickly. But even after it had fallen, perhaps by 2%, the Spaniard did a census which showed the population of Haiti in the 1490s to be still 1,100,000 people, right? And that is after they had been deliberately and accidentally decimated already. Importantly also, let me just register that that island, with its native population and African population directly across the Atlantic, had in the province of Haiti called Zaragao, they had waterworks, aqueducts that were of the scale and complexity of those that the Moors had in Spain. And the Spanish record shows that to be the case. So we're not, as we say in Jamaica, where Haiti is concerned, talking about a pian place and pian people. We're actually talking about an incredibly sophisticated people and culture with the waterworks was to do with the fact that that part of Haiti was short of water, and the aqueducts and so on was about getting water into their wonderfully complex agricultural system. African diaspora culture is present in that now lost. It's only available in archaeological studies and archaeological historical studies of the Taino people of the Greater Antilles, but be in no doubt that an African presence is powerfully a feature of the culture of the native Caribbean people at the point and shortly after of Christopher Columbus's murderous arrival. Now, at this point, we get into the slavery period, diaspora, and that takes us back to the point about the widespread attempt, and it was more than an attempt, the widespread practice of trying to persuade Africans that our African ancestors, that they had come from nowhere and nobody. And in a way, that is still going on. It's not only the white people who did it. I have a former colleague, a man called Professor Clem C. Charon. He's not a bad man. I know him well. He was a wonderful colleague and a perfectly decent human being. I actually like him, and we had proper cultural relationship. I visited his house. So I'm not attacking Clem as a person. But he has a book here, little book, called African and Indian Identities in Colonial Guyana in the 30s. And there's something odd about it, because what Clem does is to pull a set of quotes about African culture and cultural and economic aspirations in the 20s and 30s that show us to be not interested in saving, too ready to sell our land, willing to go up into the backwoods to find diamonds and gold, and then to come back and squander the money. So in effect, Clem, who really does know better, he's a bright, able man, a wonderful researcher, chooses to characterize Guyana African culture in the 20s and 30s as effectively port knocker culture. And port knockers are the Africans who went into the backwoods to get the gold and then came back. And the legend is that they wasted it on drink and prostitutes and that kind of thing. Port knocker culture is not the way to represent the reality of Guyanese African culture in the 1930s. And what Clem could easily have done, instead of using the quotes he does, which suits an intent, conscious or not, to denigrate Africans, he could have quoted from Norman Cameron, another Guyanese, who published this book at the same time that Clem is talking about. It's called The Evolution of the Negro. It's in 2 volumes, and it's a powerful expression of the efforts of Caribbean African intellectuals to explore the extent to which, far from being nothing, we have culture, historical, and civilizational substance, which we have creatively maintained in the era of the Caribbean. Clem C. Charon could have gone to Norman Cameron to source his discussion of the characterization of Africans in that part of the diaspora. Instead, he went to some other people far less significant than Cameron. And in part, it is because it suits the dichotomy that he wants to draw between, and he talks about it, between the stereotype, if you will, of the Indian and the stereotype of the African. Clem also knows, because he's read Rodney and he's a very well-informed researcher on Guyanese history, Clem knows the struggles that African Guyanese had in the period after enslavement as they tried either to maintain plantations. It wasn't easy. Guyanese plantations are polders. They come out of the Dutch tradition where you build a front wall, a back wall, side wall, and you pump out the water. You make drains that enable the water to capture and trenches and so on. And that's the nature of those plantations. And in the latter part of the story, they needed pumps, and the pumps came from places like Birmingham. And Rodney and others tell the story of African Guyanese in the post-emancipation period, the struggles that they had either to establish themselves as peasants because no land was given to them, unlike the extent to which land was given to the Indians, but also the struggles that they had to buy and maintain expensive pumps from the metropolis, from the UK, in order to try to maintain, and eventually a failing enterprise. But that is in the historical record of Guyana, and it is a little bit odd and regrettable that Clem, who I repeat, I haven't seen him for a while, but I regarded him as a friend, and I'm not knocking him personally. I'm just saying that there is something odd and regrettable about the way in which, for whatever reason, he chooses to represent the nature of African Guyanese culture at a time when there were better African Guyanese to quote from about the aspirations. And then he ignores, has to, the arrival and development of the African middle class, because they were very much into status, into saving, into education, and so on and so forth. And Clem knows that. Just the Indians were also into that. So the way he chooses to constitute what the African Guyanese cultural practice was, and therefore the cultural nature of that society and community, is just really regrettable. So I dealt with Clem because I think it's important that we understand that the effort to tell us that we are nothing and came from nowhere is not just a white attitude, is not just a white practice. Even Africans can buy into it, usually because they don't know better, or usually because they have bought into the pigmentocracy, or usually also because they have been Europeanized and have adopted European valuations of what is beauty, of how society should be organized, and so on, and have no knowledge, or have chosen deliberately or accidentally not to have knowledge of the great achievements, not now of the masses in diaspora, but of our ancestors on the continent. So, back to the question, what is it that we are speaking of when we speak, even given the complexity of multiple arrivals that I have in mind when we talk of African diaspora culture? So we have to focus on the period and process of enslavement. And that effectively begins very shortly after Christopher Columbus and continues one way or another in our Caribbean region until the 1880s, when it finally disappears as the Spaniards end enslavement of Africans in Cuba, fought to a standstill and defeated by African generals. If you hear about Cuban national struggles, struggles for national independence, and look at the 19th century, you will see that the leading strugglers are Africans. The generals are Africans, and the fighters in the numbers are Africans. And it is they who liberated Cuba, and it is from them that the United States had to intervene, pretend to have a war with Spain in order to take over Cuba. And it is they who, in the early part of the 19th century, Americans helped brown and white Cubans to slaughter in many thousands in an encounter, militarized encounter between African Cubans and other Cubans in the first decade of the 20th century. So, what is it that we're talking about? We can mention first the language. There's a significant literature dealing with what are called the Atlantic Creole. And these are languages which Africans creatively developed, faced with being separated from their homeland by a terrible process of transportation across the Atlantic, and then a terrible process of enslavement in the lands of the Americas. They needed to communicate with each other and eventually to communicate also with the master class. And in every part of the Caribbean, the African masses created new languages, so that there's a Jamaican Creole, the Bajan Creole, the Trini Creole. Actually, Trini has two Creoles because it has a French one and an English-based one. Same with Grenada and some of the other territories of the Caribbean. It's important that we register that these are languages, and my brother was saying at the beginning that Jamaican and other Creole speakers are not also Creole readers, and that the reason for that is that the orthography, the method of writing down Creole, is, in the case of Jamaican, is called the Cassidy orthography, and you have to learn it in order to use it, both to write and to read. So our brother is correct about that, but it's important that we register. It's important that Jamaican and probably all of the other Creoles can be written and are written in two ways. One is the difficult to use Cassidy and that type of academically derived and developed orthographies, writing systems, if you will, and a more popular way of writing it. And my ex-wife, Carolyn Cooper, writes a column, a Creole column, in the Jamaica Gleaner, has done for years. And also, she delivered her inaugural lecture when she became Professor of Literatures in English at Mona. That lecture was delivered half in English and half in Jamaican Creole. And her column, weekly column, gets published in two versions. One is the Cassidy orthography, and the other is ordinary English, which people who read, for example, Louise Bennett, everybody in Jamaica can read Louise Bennett's poems because they are in a version of English. The orthography is English, and you can therefore read it relatively easily, and none of the problems of the Cassidy orthography affected. So whether it's readable or not, and whether people can read it or not, depends on which orthography is being used. And it matters that the Cassidy orthography is not all that difficult to understand. I have been a bit lazy, but if you go, there's a book called Jamaica Talk by that same scholar, an Englishman called Cassidy. And his book has the basis of the Jamaican orthography explained in about a page inside of Jamaica Talk, and it makes it clear that if you spend a little time learning how it works, you can read it and write using it very speedily indeed. It's not at all difficult. So now, what has happened with those languages? The masses invented and used them, and middle-class people also use them. And Caribbean literature and Caribbean music lyrics use the creoles of all of the territories from which the singers come. So Bob Marley's work is an outcome of the creative, poetic, political use of Jamaican Creole. The same applies to Slinger Francisco, the Mighty Sparrow, and to almost all of those traditions of popular, creative, dynamic, sometimes anti-colonial, sometimes even anti-imperialist stuff. Thus, in about 1979, the Great Sparrow did a song, didn't he? London Bridge is Falling Down. And it welcomed the Grenada Revolution, the Iranian Revolution, the Nicaraguan Revolution, and so on. That's what happens in that song. So even though we don't have enough time to spend on it, the truth of the matter is that the Caribbean African masses, by their creative invention of the various Atlantic Creoles, have provided themselves, the brightest and best of our sons and daughters, with a language different from English, different from French. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Haiti or in Barbados or in Jamaica, provided our singers and players of instruments with a language that, in the case of calypso, in the case of Jamaican music, reggae, has managed in that language to communicate with the whole world. And the same thing in a way has happened, though less noticed because less popular, with the incorporation of the language of the masses of the Caribbean people into the literature of the Caribbean region, the creative literature of the Caribbean region. So up until the early part of the 20th century, Caribbean writers, certainly Caribbean writers in English, were struggling to write a Caribbean, a Jamaican, a Trini novel, book. And by the 30s, evidence of success was beginning to appear. And central to that was the recognition of the importance of talking about the language, talking about the lives of the masses of the Jamaican and Caribbean people, but also the importance of talking about using the language of the people to talk about the experience of the society, which is the magic of Louise Bennett in Jamaica, and it's the magic of the early Kaisoans in Trinidad and Tobago. It's the magic of the equivalent of Mento in Jamaica, and so on. So the languages that our ancestors created everywhere is the foundation of our musical drive to the world and our literary drive to the world, and using the language of the Caribbean people, succeeding in learning how to do that in literature. That is what made, in the post-Second World War period, something that is known as a world-class Caribbean literature. The essence of it is how the writers deploy the language of the Caribbean masses, which our people from the ground had made available to them for creative use. If we look further at our religion, we see that the Caribbean masses and the African American masses generally have created religion after religion. People say, what is the point of bigging up religious creativity or creativity in religious field? I say that even though I'm not committed to religion and I'm not a believer in any deity, it still matters that that was a site of creation, invigorating creation, sometimes even rebellious creation. If we look at the pattern of resistance in our Caribbean islands and even in America, we find frequently that Africanized versions of the Christian religion were used by the resistors. And that goes in a way for Garvey, it goes for Bedwood, it goes for the 1865 man, Paul Bogle, and it goes for Sam Shaw. They were all religious leaders in their way. I'm sorry that Marcus Garvey reverted to Catholicism at the end of his life, because inside of his movement, there's a whole inspiring and interesting Africanized creative religious theological development driven by Bishop Maguire before he left the Garvey movement. So equally the musics, and there's a literature on there's a literature on the African musics of the New World. It's a spectacular and wonderful cultural achievement. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Cuba, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Jamaica, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Barbados, Brazil, and so on. All of the masses in those places have calling upon the resources of their Smaditizing, calling upon the resources of the recognition of their creativity. And incidentally, the point has to be made that the Caribbean African, and indeed the American diasporan African, faced a challenge not faced by any other people in the Americas. In the islands of the Caribbean, the natives were virtually wiped out. So that's a terrible challenge. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the cultural challenges. And what do we have? We have a European population that was able, didn't have to create anything original because it could call upon its traditions and work within that, acknowledged tradition. And the same applied to Indians and Chinese who knew, in inverted commas, that they come from somewhere, that they had a coherent culture behind them and to call upon it. And indeed, that's what happens in the Indo-Caribbean writing. Naipaul does two things. He reaches down and uses the language of the Afro-Trinidadian And that's what happens in Miguel Street. But at the point at which he is writing A House for Mr. Biswas, that is Naipaul calling upon and converting to Caribbean creative usage a whole tradition pulled almost intact and unmodified from the Indian subcontinent of his background. So even when you're dealing with Indo-Caribbean, it is still the case that the creative linguistic drive of the African-Caribbean masses is what informs them at their most uniquely creative modes and moments of expression. And it would be possible, and is perhaps necessary, to talk about our cultural traditions where mass, where carnival, and so on is concerned. And I want to call upon my partner's, now wife indeed, experience, where people were called from here, UK now, to Nigeria by the Nigerian government about 15 or 20 years ago to help them set up and run an all Nigeria carnival. The president of then president of Nigeria was involved in the process. It wasn't any pian-pian to me. And they were clear. They said, what we want is not what's happening in Brazil, too much nakedness, and not Notting Hill, because too much nakedness, but also whatever. And the people from here that they brought to advise them said, of course you're right. What you need to do is put on the street of Abuja the popular and traditional culture of the however many states and peoples of Nigeria there are. And that is exactly what the Obasanjo regime did with the Abuja festival, with the Abuja carnival. And importantly, what it enabled those who went from here to see was the extent to which the Trinidad Carnival, represented by the ill-informed as a manifestation of the god Bacchus, and everything about it somehow come from Europe. Mummeries, this, that, and the next thing. When in fact, on the streets of Nigeria, the efforts of the Ghana government to place on the streets of the Nigerian capital Nigerian culture showed in instance after instance how African-Caribbean people in Jamaica, in the Bahamas, in Cuba, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Grenada, whether you're talking about short knee or jab jab or whatever else, had managed, despite the terror of carnival, despite the claims, the telling us that we were nothing, had nothing and had built nothing, brought nothing, we had managed in those various places, and taken as a whole, to preserve and reproduce and recreate developmentally, exactly stuff that is and was visibly African in an African country, celebrating current African traditional popular culture. So the truth of the matter is that our ancestors, despite the terror of enslavement, despite the cultural assault, despite them saying that we were nothing, despite them saying that we had brought nothing with us, had, by a miracle of preservation, of cultural preservation and of cultural transformation, preserved much, much more than is usually thought or understood, and much that can be recognized as not European but authentically African, just by going to any part of Nigeria, because there could have been the equivalent of the Abuja Carnival in Ghana or in Angola or whatever. And if it had been in Angola, some of the elements of late enslavement and post-enslavement Jamaica would have been visible there, because in that post-emancipation cluster of arrivals, some of the people who came actually came from the Congo-Angola region, and elements of that are visible in the culture of Jamaica today, as has been brought out in the literature on Kumina and so on. So the long and short of it is that there is a great deal to be looked at, studied, understood, talked about, celebrated in what we can legitimately speak of when we say that Africa's Western diaspora, whether we are talking about what happened before Christopher Columbus, whether we're talking about what happened as a result of Columbus manifested as the system of Atlantic enslavement, whether we're talking about the Africans who came as indentured workers in the period of the 19th century, or we're talking about African arrivals in the Americas now, and especially in Western Europe and North America, from continental Africa in the period since the Second World War, we have concretely, legitimately, beautifully, excitingly African surviving, lively, developing, inspiring, sometimes revolutionary rhythms of resistance fill the air with Caribbean, African American music and songs of rebellion all over the world. So we're talking about a major reality that has to be properly understood and celebrated. Thank you.
Giving thanks, Elder Cecil, as always. You know what I'm saying? We give thanks for that rundown of the history of our people in the Caribbean. Brothers and sisters, we're going to take a brief 1 minute interval very quickly. Give me a sec, and we'll be back shortly after this message. 1 second, brothers and sisters.
Even slightly longer than that. You could play that song.
Oh, that's a good point. Right. So, Elder Cecil.
All right. Yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah. We're gonna play this. Oops. Hold on there. We can play the tune. And we'll be back right after this, brothers and sisters. All right, stay tuned.
Scraping.
It's African thing.
Earring in our ears.
It's African thing.
Everything is everything. We're not to judge a man by the color of them skin. Downtown President Brown and African tribal sing.
It's African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting.
Well, them took we four parents from the motherland. Africa we from, and there we belong. African and Jamaicans, we all are one. So make we beat on the drum and sing this a song. Come in and you come give your contribution.
If you see a gal a wine, banana head top, nobody put on no label like the gal sock. A vibe, she a vibes to the sound where she hear. It's a African thing and she bring it down here. It's a African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting.
All the dancing where you cause all a explosion.
All of them a come from in the motherland.
go dancing,
Hey, butterfly dancing, hey,
and the tatty dancing.
hey. All world of dance is African thing. It's African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting.
Them took us away in captivity and required from us a song. Them want we fi sing King Alpha song in a strange land. Now come down, Danu, come give your contribution.
If you see a girl a wine, panala, it up, nobody put on no label like the girl slack. A bounce, she a bounce to this thing where she hear. It's a African thing, and she bring it down here. It's a African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting. So you see the ringing and nose, it's African thing.
Reading away here, it's a African thing.
Ringing at your ears, it's African thing.
That's why you want the massive come follow and sing.
It's African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting.
Yes, it's African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting. So if you see a girl a wine, banana head up, nobody put down a label like the girls like. Bounce, she a bounce to the vibes where she hear. It's an African thing, and she bring it down here.
It's African thing, so African people sing.
And if you love what you hear, make me hear you chanting.
Well, them took we four parents from the motherland. Africa we from, and there we belong. African and Jamaicans, we all are one. So make we meet on the job and sing this a song. Come in and youth and give your contribution.
Boy, President want to show so you can't touch on the man for hell color of them skin, you know.
Yes, indeed, kings and queens. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We're there. African diaspora culture, the African-Caribbean, and the Nationalisation of our people, brothers and sisters. We have been with the exposition of Elder Cecil Gutsmore for the past hour and a piece, brothers and sisters, and he selected this tune, President Brown. It's an African thing. You don't know, kings and queens. I will not beg no friend for them thing there, you know. It's an African thing. I will not beg no friend. Yeah, African thing we are dealing with. Yeah, you know what I mean? That's the thing, brothers and sisters. Yeah. So the name of the game is Interaction Discussion. I'm actually gonna share the link now. Yeah. So anybody who wants to come through, ask Elder Cecil a question. Yeah, raise a point, whatever, feel free to do so right now. The link is in the chat. And if you would like to ask your question or make a comment from the chat itself, feel free to type, but please at Kimbunga Media, someone know, you know, say you want to catch my attention, you know what I mean, and come through on the panel. Right, let me bring back Elder Cecil right about now. Greetings, Elder Cecil. Everything blessed?
Yeah, thank you, my brother. In connection with that song, there is a brief point to be made. Anybody who listened properly will have heard that it's really about Jamaica dance hall and the alleged element of slackness within it. And what those two artists are saying is that there's another way to look at what is happening. So nobody put on a label like the gal them slack. Yes, and then they talk about how they are in their dances vibing to traditional African dances, which can be recognized as traditional African dances if you go and look on the continent or know sensibly where those dances come from. The problem that presents us with, and that carnival and the revelry and the nakedness, is that even though when you look at traditional African dance, you see gyrating women and their bottoms are all over the place and exciting and so on. But it's when it takes place in a cultural context where it's not about lasciviousness, it's about something more complex and higher than that. But
Of course.
stripped of the African cultural context, you end up with stuff that doesn't have the cultural context, and all you have left is the lasciviousness. And that's a problem that we have to try to find a way around. And I don't actually know how.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know. Well, while I shall not confess to be a keen observer of the waistlines and buttocks of African women, what you have said is correct. Yeah, that and it's even deeper when you look into the rhythms. I remember asking a question one time. I can't remember. I was with this in a family conversation about the fact that Jamaica, like whilst all of the other islands, developed a music that came out of Kaiser and is almost like or related to Kaiser in very direct ways. Yeah, like reggae music is a quite unique phenomenon, coming out of the not to say that there are not other unique music forms, but there's something different about reggae music, and in looking into it and you go into dancehall, there's something about the Kumina rhythms that came into Jamaica and their relationship to Nyabingi, and then what later becomes dancehall, that the preservation of those rhythms and like coming forward to form a new music genre, but also forming a spiritual system in Rastafari, you know what I'm saying, and that kind of different things. There's a whole history there and a whole cultural complex that we often lose. And I would agree when we oversimplify the label of slackness. And I know that you mentioned Mama Carolyn Cooper before, and I know she's done some work on this in terms of what, even when you look at the slackness, but we're looking at it in the terms of the confinement of the African female form, and that then developing a way to express and celebrate the African female form at the same time as well, which is a legitimate thing to do, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's deep stuff there. I wanted to just do a quick thing though, Olusegun, because there's a few books, and I'm sure you can add an endless number of books to this year. But on Jamaican patois, I read this book when I was like a teenager. This is the first book I actually read on Jamaican patois. It's called Understanding Jamaican Patois: An Introduction to Afro-Jamaican Grammar by L. Emily Adams. And I know Dr. Talawai. I'm not sure if Dr. Talawai is listening, but I realized that this is quite people that study Jamaican patois in the academy tend to. This is one of their early books. Oftentimes, I didn't know that when I read it as a child, and I didn't know that until Dr. Talawai told me about it.
I can't pretend to know it at all, but there is a significant academic literature on Jamaican patois, and indeed all of the patois or creoles of the Atlantic world are very intensely studied. There is actually, and it's been around since something like 1960, a dictionary of Jamaican Creole. It's called the Dictionary of Jamaican English. There are 2 editions of it. I have them on my shelf, and and that same the main author of that work, Cassidy, has a very important book called Jamaica Talk, which discusses the connection to continental Africa of the language that the Jamaican masses developed, that we call patois, that we call Jamaican Creole, and how extraordinarily, what has happened is that the West African grammar has been preserved, and some West African words have been preserved, and then it's been effectively lexified. That is to say, enough words have been pulled from French and English and even Arawakan to make the language, and that's what Jamaican patois is. And the same is true. The grammar and people think that it's ungrammatical. Not a thing of gossip. All languages have grammar, and
Of course.
grammars of the Atlantic creoles are African, and the academics make that clear.
Yes, Elder Cecil. I might read a passage from this book in a little bit, yeah. Just to say though, that there's always research being done on Jamaican patois as a language, and there is a YouTube channel called the African-Caribbean Institute of Jamaica that a few months ago featured a lecture by a brother whose name I am forgetting, but it's on Jamaican patois. I'm surprised sometimes at the new terminology that I come across. That is Dr. Joseph Farquharson is his name.
I don't know that name, but let me just, maybe your listeners don't. I actually was once on the advisory committee of the African-Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, which is one of the subdivisions of the of the Institute of Jamaica, as is the Marcus Garvey entity, the
Liberty Hall.
Marcus Garvey, what's it called? Liberty Hall, the legacy of Marcus Garvey. So the ACIJ has been a research institute for the longest while. Some of the work of a remarkable Caribbean scholar. What's her name? She's married to our Garvey.
Maureen Warner Lewis.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm about to bring her up.
A lot of her work, a significant bit of it on the if you like, the Africanity of Jamaica, including stuff on herbs and all of that. So the ACIJ had been investigating this element of the African Jamaican cultural reality for the longest while. And they've got a good body of output and a good library.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Well, you know what? Let me because I was going to bring this up anyway. So let me do it now. Now that you've evoked her name, Maureen Warner Lewis. Who is actually from Trinidad.
She's Trinidadian. Yes.
But she's married to
Professor Rupert Lewis.
Professor Rupert Lewis, who is from Jamaica.
Who's a tremendous scholar.
Absolutely. And done some good work on Garvey as well.
Yeah, he's done work on Garvey, and his PhD thesis was on is on Walter Rodney, and it's a phenomenal book.
Right. Yeah. So just to give you a few of her titles, brothers and sisters, Archibald Monteith, and this is about Igbo culture, in Jamaica. All right, over here. It can get a little piece bigger, Then you've got Trinidad Yoruba. You know what I'm saying? Then you got Guinea's other sons. All right. You know what I'm saying? Now this is the one I'm most familiar with, which is Central Africa in the Caribbean. So if you want to know what the Kumina and all of these things, this is where you go for that one. So there's a breadth of literature. She's one of the best as far as African spiritual cultural retentions in the Caribbean, and the cultural retentions in general. She's one of the best.
Maureen is absolutely second to none. She's a tremendous scholar. And in Trinidad, a brother who's probably now passed, J.D. Elder, African Survivals in Trinidad and Tobago, is another extremely important source of the Trinidad material. But our scholars since the war have produced lots of important and revealing, enlightening stuff on all of these issues, including there's actually a book by a former colleague of mine that looks at what she calls dread talk, which is the way in which Rastafari has transformed Jamaican language. With the best example of it is the University College of the West Indies. Used to be shortened, as you see.
Yes.
And the Rastaman them say, "You blind."
You blind.
Yeah. So it's a
Right.
reversal of
Yes.
the
Absolutely.
yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely. By the way, coming back to understanding Pato, one of the things that she does in this book
Yeah.
is she engages in a grammatical comparison between Jamaican Patois and Aïssan Creole, the language of Haiti, to the extent that basically they're the same language family. Yeah, they evolve from the same language family. Yeah, I'm saying,
the language family is what is called the Atlantic Creole, and there's a Caribbean set of them, and so on. There's actually quite a few. There's actually a book by that title which discusses these various Creole.
Right, so yeah, it's a serious study. Then Elder Cecil mentioned the spirituality and religion and its relationship to revolts. One good book on that topic is Taki's Revolt, by Vincent Brown. So it will go into the Obia Man. I know the Obia Man was central to the organizing of Taki's rebellion in 1760 in Jamaica.
It's not just Taki. The biggest of them, the Haitian Revolt,
of course,
with a priest and all of the conspiracies take place in a religious context. There's the Wakaiman ceremony, which is a religious spiritual festival, and Bookman Dutty was a priest and so on and so forth. And the cultural inspiration for what is supposed to have been an impossible socio-political event, right? This is talking about the largest slavery society in the world at the time, Haiti. It had surpassed Jamaica, which up until about 1760 was the most important slave society. Well defended by Napoleon's armies, no less. And this is what Africans took apart using their cultural and military resources. Importantly, unlike in Jamaica, where they developed a split between Maroons and Africans who remained on the plantations. Indeed, in the 1730s, the Maroons signed treaties that committed them to taking a role in the oppression of those who were still on the plantation. Nothing of the kind happened in Haiti, and so that revolution incorporates marinage and voodoo and all of that rich African military and spiritual heritage, and that's importantly why that revolution was successful.
I'm looking to plan a conversation with a Maroon brother on subject matters at some point on the system. So I might have to invite you through for that one. Controversial topic.
It shouldn't be controversial, and
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
Sometime down the road, if you find a Maroon who's willing to take part in the discussion, I'd be willing. But I'll send you an article of mine, which was never published anywhere, that deals exactly with that issue.
Please.
The Jamaican Maroons go through two phases. They fight the Spaniards and then they fight the British. They fight the British right up until the end of the 1730s, at which point they sign treaties with the British. And in those treaties, they undertake to return runaways. They undertake to help suppress subsequent slave rebellions of the enslaved, and they undertake to assist British forces if the island gets invaded by competitors like the French or the Dutch or whatever. There's no doubt about that. From the 1742, when incidentally Nanny, who is one of our national heroes, actually signs a third treaty, which, even though it's not called a treaty, it's a land grant. And the purpose of the British offering it to her was to take her people out of the struggle against enslavement.
Yeah.
So from 1742, even though Nanny is famously there representing female slave resistance, after 1742, along with the other Maroons of Jamaica, she is on the side of the oppressor. And that tradition continues right through until 1865, when Bogle went and had discussion with Maroons in Portland and St. Thomas about the revolt that eventually happened. And they said no. When the Bogle revolt happened, Maroons went and sat in Port Antonio and Bath, waiting for a ship to come round from Port Royal to give them guns to go up into the hills and shoot down fellow Jamaicans, which they did, as they had done in 1831, led by the same white Scottish half-pay officer in 31 and 65.
You know, Elder Cecil, because I wasn't gonna go into this, but should you say you dropped some of the history here? Okay, there's two things here. Why it's controversial is not because the history, as you've correctly laid out. And by the way, because you know, it was commonly said that Nanny never signed the treaty, with Kodja, and that's one of the reasons why Nanny has been celebrated by Pan-Africanists. Go on.
But it's important that effectively she did sign not the treaty, but a treaty.
Right.
The document that she signed in 1742 was the third treaty between the Maroons and the British, accepting that they just called it a treaty. It was a land grant, but the terms of it and the intent. And we have it. I've looked at the historical records.
No, I hear you.
So that's what I said. Up until she we don't exactly know why she didn't sign the treaty with the Windward Maroons.
Well, the folklore is that she traveled from where she did there, go Kodja, to ask him not to sign the treaty. That's the folklore.
That importantly is folklore. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that she went anywhere. And one of the things that happened that happened is that Maroons are very proud, one, and rightly, and they have some very enthusiastic scholars abroad, including somebody called Kenneth Bilby, and those people, despite being extraordinary scholars, embellish the Nanny story because they can't afford to do otherwise, and the historical record contradicts what they're saying.
Yes. All right, understood. But the reason why I'll say it's controversial is not necessarily because we can't detail the history. It's because of the extent to which that history is still being celebrated by our brothers and sisters who refer to themselves as Maroons. That treaty is still celebrated every year. We have a situation right here now in Jamaica where the treaty is being used as the key document that establishes Maroon nationhood, and in an argument with the Jamaican government about republicanism. You know what I'm saying? And so it's not even, for me, the controversy, like, because we understand that we can understand it within the historical context, that a lot of decisions were made under extreme pressure. The Maroons fought the British for decades, right? You know what I'm saying? And so we understand that there's a context in which, and I think that most of us can get our heads around that. What I can't reconcile is why today we still celebrate them thing there. That's what I can't reconcile. You know what I mean? That's what I want to do.
The Maroons, up until the end of the 1730s, do have an unenviable record of resistance.
Of course.
The documentation on that is crystal clear. Orlando Patterson has a wonderful essay in which he treats what is called the First Maroon War. That is to say, from the 1670s to the 1730s as the First Maroon War. And it looks like a war of national liberation conducted by African Jamaicans against all the forces that the British could throw at them. And when they cave in, it actually looks as if it's the British that are under pressure. But the British managed to persuade them, and they managed to persuade themselves that it's in their interest to enter into these treaties. And the treaties don't just preserve them, by saying we're going to stop fighting. They sign up to, and this is repetition, they sign up to being part of effectively the anti-slavery policing in Jamaica.
Yeah. No, and the issue is because I you learn these things as a child.
One other point has to be made. I'm afraid neither the Maroons nor the Jamaican state know the history of that stuff, because if they did, the Jamaican state and the Maroons would know that in 1842 the British Parliament passed a law which abolished all of those treaties, and it's called the Land Apportionment Act. And the purpose of it was to give individual Maroons parcels of land that had previously been collectively given to the various groups. To the extent that piece of legislation is on the statute book, the Jamaican government has a perfect right to say that what you're talking is nonsense. But even if they weren't saying that, the treaties from 1738 to 1742 don't give anybody in Jamaica the right to say that they are outside of the authority of the state.
It's a thing where, anyway, like I said, this ain't our subject today, so we don't want to go in it too deep. I'll wait to we have the proper conversation feed. But there's a whole heap of contradictions there. I said on a previous show when I was discussing some of this last year, I think it was, that all things being equal, Maroon nationhood should be the foundation, or should provide a significant amount of the foundation upon which we establish actual sovereignty, as a people in Jamaica, right? It should be, but it can be, because every time we are reading about it, they might tell you about 1738 treaty and deal with the British, and I've heard it broke my heart when I heard a Maroon elder, I think it was on Ari FM. Basically, we killed Paul Morgan, and I saw it go. Right? You know what I'm saying? Them kind of things. I was like, raw.
No, there is.
So those big contradictions. We have to,
I think in that connection, that I would like to make is that you say Maroon resistance, but up until 1738, there was no difference between the Maroons and the non-Maroons.
No, I agree.
There were Africans on the plantation and off the plantation engaged in
100%. 100%. What I mean is, in terms of the capacity to build community and nation, right? You see what I'm saying, right? So like if we were talking Brazil, I would say Palmares should be the foundation, the gravitational point of our sovereignty, if that makes sense. In a similar way that the crown is to Britain, right? You know what I'm saying?
I hear you, but my point is that what happened up until the late 1730s was that our resistance was in two terrains. Some of us were outside the plantation, and some of us were on the plantation.
I
What
agree.
happened after 1738 is that the ones who were off the plantation became part of the suppression of those on the plantation. And that continued even up to 1865 when enslavement had ended. So there is a questionable basis for talking about nation sovereignty and connecting it to maroon resistance.
No, I take your point.
Better or more distinctive than African resistance.
I take your point. I take your point. I take your point. Yeah, Chief Taki, I'm my man still, you know. So we know where I say. But maybe seeing as we've gone as deeply into the subject as we have, maybe it might be irresponsible not to put a counter argument, which is that there were also Africans on plantations who were weaponized against the Maroons at different points. That is a counter argument. What would you say to that?
I don't think that's a counter argument. Obviously, the system of oppression always uses some of the oppressed in the attempt to hold on to power. So, you know, it's the Askari where the native, some of the natives are signed up as warriors on behalf of the system. If you read Captain John Stedman's book on Suriname, you see that it's Africans that constitute largely the army that the Dutch send against the Bush Negroes in that late 18th century encounter. So you can't connect the oppressed with the betrayers from amongst them and give the it just a difficult, wrongful thing to do.
Yes. Absolutely. All right, let's take it beyond Jamaica now. Another book that I have is History of Religions in the Caribbean. By Dale Bisnoff. He's from Guyana.
Go on. I do know that one. Yes.
Right. So very
read it recently.
Right, very good book, but he goes through more. Like he goes through Catholicism, he goes through Hinduism and Islam. But there's two particular chapters that are relevant to our conversation today. One is Africans and Africanisms in the Caribbean. Very good overview of how we preserved and evolved and recreated our spiritual systems, and then the Africanization of Christianity. So those two chapters in this book are relevant to our conversation today. Then another one, which is a recent one, I believe it was published last year or the year before that. Obia, Race and Racism. Caribbean Witchcraft in the English Imagination. By Eugenia O'Neill.
I don't know that one. Who's the author there?
Eugenia O'Neill. Recently published. Like I said, last year or the year before that. No sooner.
What O'Neill?
Eugenia. I can only claim to have skimmed this one, but it goes into
send me a photo of the cover of that book.
I will do. But it goes into the significance of Obia and the laws that were passed against it and what that meant politically within that you're going to get a story of African retention. Now you mentioned by the way, on the subject of Kenneth Bilby, because you just reminded me of something there. He has an article called Kumina, a Congo-based tradition in the New World. Now the importance of that article, for all those who are interested, you would have heard me mention this article before in previous presentations. He writes it in conjunction with Kimbwanden de Kiabun Seki Fukiao, who's Bakongo. He's a scholar from the Congo. And he's breaking down the language used by the Kumina people and what the words mean. In the article. Go ahead.
No, I skated over that, but you're absolutely right, and that's what I said about the fact that there are a series of African comings, And one of the African comings to the Caribbean is that post-slavery one. And a significant part of the group that came after slavery came from that part of Africa, Congo, Angola region. And that has refreshed the African content of Jamaican culture. And there is a short, small literature on that matter. I think Maureen Warner-Lewis touches on it, and several others do so as well.
Yeah. You know, then now you mentioned Suriname, I watched a video some time ago where a brother from Ghana travels, and I believe it was Suriname that he went to, you know, and he went to this village in Suriname, and he broke down, because he heard people speaking, like he could hear the tree. Right? In what they were saying, like he broke down and started crying. And for those who are long-time viewers, you might remember that I used to open the show with a song from a group called ISAC. For soca lovers, they are the group that sung and wrote the original to what Alison Hines and Square One from Barbados covered as the song Faluma. Faluma ding ding ding. That's actually a Surinamese song that comes from the Winti tradition. And I looked for a translation of the song, and apparently what that song is about is Faluma is a bird, apparently, and the bird is supposed to represent African people, and the song is actually asking basically who killed the bird, right, and who dismembered the bird and separated the bird from its family, right, and them kind of things there. So when we look into the lyrics of a lot of these songs, like we wind up to Faluma every carnival, and most of us have no idea what the song is about, what it's saying. So there's some deep, but then that the song that I used to open up with, it was called Bakabushi Nengre, which is the Bakabushi Nengre are the Maroons of Suriname. I learned. And so there's a whole history about the Maroons of Suriname. That we need to, that people need to. I'm just putting this out there for people that want to do further research and study, as pointers for you to study, brothers and sisters, coming up.
Two things about that. One is my own experience. I was invited decades ago to the Netherlands, to Holland, and there was it was to a cultural event involving Surinamese in Holland. And as part of the event, they had a Ghanaian drummer and some Bush Negro drummers, and they could speak to each other. Because the Bush Negroes retreated from the coastlands and effectively kept the African language with some, but not making it unrecognizable. And I saw that and heard that with my own eyes at that event in Suriname. Neither of them broke down and cried, but I certainly saw that happen and heard that happen. And the other thing is that there's a popular book. It may even have been a television program called "I Met My Brother," where an African American, actually two African Americans, go back to Suriname, and the book is a documentation of their encounter with the Africans in the backlands of Suriname, so-called Bush Negroes.
Beautiful. Now, finally, as far as books are concerned, there's Africanisms in American culture, right? So we're dealing with specifically the United States here, but we know that like when you're talking about Louisiana and New Orleans and a few other places, there's a significant presence of Africans from the Caribbean.
And those islands where they speak Pichi.
the Gullah Geechee, so the Carolinas, yeah, and,
Yes.
and the islands of the Carolinas.
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes.
you get a lot of that information in this book by Joseph E. Holloway. It's a popular book on
Yes.
on the subject, yeah. But for those who want more information. Elder Cecil, by the way, brothers and sisters, we are interactive with Elder Cecil. We will be for a few more minutes. If you want to come live, yeah, and interact with Elder Cecil, ask him a question on the topic, feel free to do so. The link is in the chat. And if you want to ask a question in the chat, so you want me to read it out, please at Kimbunga Media. Yeah. Now, Elder Cecil, a question for you.
Yes.
Because a subject that I have not found any research on, although I can't claim to have looked deeply, but it's an issue that I'm very interested in, is the anglicization of Jamaican patois. And what I mean by that is, all right, for example, when obviously I grew up in England, yeah, but it was normal to hear the term booger, yeah, for footwear. Yeah. Right. Crep. Right. Booger. Yeah. But I very rarely hear the word booger anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Go put on your booger. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a word that I very rarely hear. And then you hear people that are scholars in Jamaican patois, and they say that there's a lot of words. For example, the word Anansi, although it's used for the character in the story, is a word that's just used for spiders. Yeah, just any spiders are Nancy. Yeah, but we don't use those words anymore because the language is becoming more and more anglicized. Yeah, if you go in a like patois is different depending on where you are in Jamaica. So if you're there a city, it's one type of patois. If you're there a country, it's the next type of patois. And if you go the maroon villages and certain other surrounding areas, you have what they call the Chromanti language. Yeah. And this operates on a continuum, right? So in the field of linguistics, they call it like regular patois, and then they call it deep patois, and then you got the Chromanti language. Are you familiar with any scholarship that is looking at the anglicization of the Jamaican language? So that the fact that it's becoming more and more anglicized in terms of its lexicon and grammar, and less and less Africanized in that regard.
No, I mean, I wouldn't formulate it in that way,
right?
Because the process that we are involved in is it's a language that's developing and that incorporates feature after feature from all over the broad world environment that it encounters. So it pulls stuff in from African America and from white music. It pulls stuff in from politics. It does the dread talk stuff. And you don't have to be even arrested to be doing that. On Galaxy Radio, nobody any longer says next week, it's always next strong.
Next strong, yeah.
and so on. So that kind of thing is a feature of all live and dynamically alive languages. And it's not in this case anglicization. It's just the process of how the creators and users of the language are moving it along. Now,
sorry, go on.
No, so on booger, that may be a West African term for footwear, but I suspect something else, which is that almost certainly, because we used to import shoes from, I think it was Czechoslovakia, batter shoes or something. And so those shoes were very cheap, and the boogers were one of those brand things with a very light canvas shoe with a rubber bottom. And that was the booger. Nothing else was. Now here in the UK, something else may have got called booger by Jamaicans or Jamaican influenced people, because an extraordinary thing happened in the UK in the 60s and 70s as black youth from Africa, from all over the Caribbean, encountered the racism of this place. They made a culture that used Jamaican language, that used Jamaican music, and you know, they didn't have to be anything from anywhere near Jamaica. Nigerians and Ghanaians were part of that stuff. I know some of them are big men now, but I knew them as people who were in my classes or in youth clubs that I was connected with in the 70s and so on. So that's a function of how we managed. And the other thing that was incredibly widely adopted was Rastafari in that moment. So it's really that is happening rather than any
no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm on the one hand, I'm slightly disagreeing with you on the other, because obviously we know language evolves. We wouldn't have Jamaica Patois if it wasn't for language evolution, right? For me, it's not the fact that language evolves; it's what the social forces are that are in fact influencing the evolution of the language. So we're having the same problem with indigenous languages, even on the continent, because they're not languages of instruction and politics. The usage of them is declining. All right, and so where languages evolve, because it's not used in those fields, whenever you want to refer to certain phenomena, you have to rely on English. For example, for new technology, for example, because our languages are not being used in the scientific field, right? So there's no word for microchip. And you know what I'm saying? There's no word for nanotechnology.
That happens in all languages. It's like
I know
French. And
I get it. But for me is that when it comes to our Creoles in the Caribbean, because of their social function, there's a and especially for the English speaking Caribbean, there's a anglicization that is really coming through like an Americanization, if that makes sense. All right, and so there's a flavor, and there's a that I feel like we're gonna lose, not just as a part of the general evolution of languages, but because of the social reality that our languages operate in and the influence of neocolonial forces that are effectively delegitimize our languages in certain fields, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I wonder. So it's discussion, not disagreement. But obviously, English represents the power in Jamaica. It's still the official language, right? And you go into courts in Jamaica, and it's English unless the judge wants to get the person who they're talking to understand, and suddenly it's in Jamaican. So that's the power situation, and you go into a court in Jamaica, and you hear people who are Creole speakers trying to speak English and having kind of difficulty. And I very memorably remember a discussion on the Beverly Manley show, that morning show, and I don't remember which radio station it was on. But Beverly brought an ordinary Jamaican woman and a middle class somebody to talk about something or another. And there came a moment when, contrary to what used to happen, the Jamaican woman said to the English speaker, "You chat English, me talk Jamaican. Talk, make me understand. Talk, make me understand you." And I'd never heard anything like that before. And what's happening is that the middle classes, you can see it happening. Because if it doesn't happen, you get odd encounters. Like this is supposed to be a joke, but this man, how's it go now? This man goes and he says I've come to see Mr. So-and-so. Where is he? And the man says, he doesn't know, but he then mentions somebody else. And the English arriver says, and where might he be? And the Jamaican man said, "Minanona mighty, sir." Right? And so yeah. So that kind of encounter between English and Jamaican happens, and you know, so the English speaker would have had to adjust in order to find out what he wanted to find out. So that's an ongoing dynamic of the place. I won't say that, for example, Irie and some of the other radio stations do more in Jamaican than once the case, but stuff is happening that is forcing the middle class to move more towards
I take that point.
Jamaican. And then there's what happens in the music. So Bob Marley is in Jamaican, he's not in English. Yeah, and the same applies, I think, to all of the big dance hall artists, and so the pressures aren't all coming from English. It's a Jamaican. It's the language of the Jamaican people.
I take your point. So maybe I'm underestimating the counter force. In that dynamic. I do take your point. I do take your point.
I lived back there for about 11 years, and so I have a fairly direct
absolutely
encounter with how things are. Although I came back here, it looks like about 14 years ago now.
A while ago, no, yeah. Well, all right. The final issue that I really want to explore, and then we'll take a couple comments from the audience before closing, is this recognition of Africanness. There's a song, and I think Auntie Claire mentioned it when she was on the talk about Carnival from Chalk Dust. Where they say they ain't see Africa at all. Yeah.
Chalk Dust's book.
All right.
Power and Rebellion, the Trinidad Carnival, in the carnival tradition in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
Hollis, Chalk Dust, Liverpool,
yeah. So yeah, if you don't know about Chalk Dust, get to know about Chalk Dust. Yeah. Serious Kaistonian, but also a scholar. Yeah. So check him out. But he's got a song called "They Ain't See Africa at All." Yeah?
Yes.
And he goes to pardon?
No, go on.
So it's a beautiful narrative, but what in one aspect of the song though, he even like tells a story where the woman got Obia man. Yeah. And even though she involved in the Obia, she can't see Africa at all. Like we disassociate Obia right? from Africa, yeah. So even with the Africanisms and the it's obvious, it's all their own way. There's still a rejection to a significant degree of an African identity, yeah. And you did touch on this, and Walter Rodney in Ground is in My Brothers touches on this as well, yeah. This rejection of an African. So what, like, and I had a and this is a long question, but I had an interaction the other day with Robert, and I was saying to him that we literally had to fight to affirm an African identity in the Caribbean because it was being attacked everywhere, and he denied it because he believes that as we have he's one that believes that our indigenous American heritage is more expansive than I do, right? So he's basically trying to affirm that we are the indigenous Americans, right? And so I'd say I'm not denying that some of us have indigenous ancestry, but I don't think it's as prevalent as you're suggesting. We are fundamentally African people. But he was denying. The point here is that there was a denial of the extent to which our African identity was attacked, and the extent to which we contributed to the denial and the negation of our African identity. Yeah. So I mean, all right, let me not ask a question. Let me just get you to respond to what I've just said. Yeah.
No. Remember, I said that the Caribbean is a pigmentocracy, and it's not just a color hierarchy in the sense of shades, skin shades. It's also a power hierarchy, right?
Yes.
And that has dictated and ingrained a whole heap of wrongful and anti-African attitudes.
Of course.
That's the first point. The second point is that the slogan, the national slogan, if slogan it be, of too many Caribbean states is out of many one people. And that diminishes the fact that a place like Jamaica is more than 90% African. And Carolyn Cooper said that somebody asked a question, if you say out of many one, then is which one? And the one in question doesn't have enough conscious African content. So strange things can happen there. Somebody in the Ministry of Tourism can say, and it happened while I was there, that we're not funding any criminal to come and visit Jamaica. And she was talking about Winnie Mandela. You can have discussion with the education department about the need to expand the study of Garvey philosophy in the school system, and the administrators will tell you that the problem is that we have a Caribbean curriculum and the other islands aren't as hot as Garvey as we are. And that's the answer that some students of mine who were doing Rupert Lewis's course on Garvey came back and said after they did a project inquiring of the authorities there why Garvey was so poorly taught in the school system. It's a place where darker skinned Black women who are doctors and lawyers and incredibly distinguished people can go and open their door and get asked by the person on the front of the door that where the missus is, because a Black person can't be the missus in a place like that because they see a Black face at the door as a helper type. So Dr. Carolyn Cooper or whoever must be not the owner of the place, but the helper. And that's the nature of the place. So battles are constantly fought, and Africanism in Jamaica, even though at the level of daily life it's very African, the awareness of the Africanity of that isn't particularly high, and at the points at which it's high, you get kind of a Pan-Africanist subculture. Right. So there's a Pan-Africanist event. IRI organizes one or two of them, and so on. But or you might have something to do with something about the door of no return, or something like that. Or you might have some discussion about Emancipation Park, and whether those statues are actually the correct thing, and so on. So it's a tricky environment for African culture, because a lot of what is most strikingly African isn't actually recognized as African.
100%.
There's a whole religious tradition where it's connected to a revival movement that happened there in the 50s and 60s and 70s of the last century, the century before last, the late 19th century. And you can go there, and you're in the presence of almost undiluted African religion, and yet next to nobody there realizes that they're participating in undiluted African religion, because they don't see themselves like that.
That. You know, and all right, I'm gonna play something, because and what in what I'm gonna play, although I'm in it, the important thing is not me. The important thing is what I'm gonna play from Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru. This is a snippet of an Irie FM show, and the video is me licking out against well, not licking out really, but just responding to some dynamics. There's a lot of Caribbean identity talk at the moment. One of the things that happens is that what is African in the Caribbean gets defined as Caribbean, whereas what is Indian gets defined as Indian, what is Chinese gets defined as Chinese, even though it can be Caribbean. But what is African just gets simply defined as Caribbean. And I want to give you an example of how that happens.
That's a good and true and powerful point.
You know. Hold on there.
Was listening to Running African, hosted by Sister Kabo Ma'at Keru Wadeya, and she featured a story on some events and conversations that were taking place in Jamaica on this issue. Take a listen.
You notice that there's a big conversation going on here in Jamaica right now about Mark Golding and whether or not he's black or white. And you heard a response where, you know, we have all kinds of people, because sort of the motto is out of many one. So this is what we're hearing now, right? That, we have Chinese Jamaican, we have Indian Jamaican, and so on. And the person who was speaking, I think it might have been Mr. Morgan himself, you know, called out every other race Jamaican apart from African Jamaican. That in itself was telling.
So
so you can say Indian Jamaican, you can say Chinese Jamaican, you can say German Jamaican, you can say Irish Jamaican, but nobody says African Jamaican. And I find that this is something that is happening all over the Caribbean. Like, and for us who are people of the Caribbean in this country, that we are identifying a Caribbean culture divorced from and void of an Africanness, but have no problems recognizing that Diwali is Indian culture in the Caribbean. You know what I'm saying? No problem whatsoever. You know what I'm saying?
No, this is in part our fault. We're not fighting assertively around the need to make the claim, which is central to what I was saying earlier, is that we are the only genuinely creative people. The African-Caribbean masses are the only genuinely creative people in the region, because everything that's occurred there has come out of what our masses did, right? Including early Naipaul, right? And so it's in the literature, it's in the music, it's in the religion, it's in the dance, it's in the food, everything. And so, and also importantly, we are the only ones who were enslaved in the Caribbean. There is talk of reparations. Brown and white people are talking about Caribbean reparation. Jamaica wasn't enslaved. It's African Jamaicans who were enslaved. And yet us African Caribbean people haven't bothered to recognize That it's us as a community that must be organizing to make sure that the reparations is in an appropriate amount and comes to us, not to anybody else, to whom to which they have absolutely no entitlement. And nobody says that.
No, because you have to understand, say, the head of the you have to look at the makeup of the head of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and as well as the fact that we know, but I'm make it plain, and then and then people get excited every time the president of Guyana comes over here and whack it and slap up some journalists on the 10 live vision. So that's why me can't celebrate, because we know what I go on Guyana. And the contradictions and all of these things. So, anyway, look into that, brothers and sisters. We're going to get to the comments now, early sister, very quickly. Dr. Talawa says, greetings, my brother. St. Lucia start big up for them language in the school system. What met J.A. difficult? I didn't know that, actually. Because a lot of people in St. Lucia are now speaking English. Like, if you listen to a lot of St. Lucian soca, even Dominica, a lot of them are speaking English. So I didn't know that the patois in the Creole in the Creole in St. Lucia, Dominica, Haiti, Martinique, etc., are mutually intelligible. Yeah, they can more or less understand each other.
Yes, that's because it's English and it's French and African.
And African,
right. I don't know if they're 100% intelligible, but they clearly
not 100%, but they can converse. They can convert. I was in a place. Well, and then I think you have Dominica and St. Lucia are very, very close, as in far as their language. And but I've seen Haitian and Dominica speak.
And there's nothing particularly odd about it, because the European language and the African background is what makes the commonality. So the same applies to Trinidad Creole, Barbados Creole, and Jamaican Creole or Guyanese Creole. We can understand each other.
Yeah, most definitely.
Because it's the lexicizing feature, that is to say, where most of the words come from is English.
Yes.
Not in all of those places.
All right. Melaman said, when I entered high school, upper class kids couldn't understand patois. Interesting. I'm sure.
Where is that?
He was schooled in Jamaica.
Yeah. And who couldn't? Just read that for me again.
He said, when I entered high school, upper class kids couldn't understand patois.
No, the impression that I have is that all Jamaicans who function in Jamaica properly understand patois. That's how I see it. Let me tell you a story. My family of origin spoke English at home. And so I learned Jamaican in the playground and because when you weren't with your parents or your teachers, you taught patois.
Yeah.
I saw it go. So now there was an occasion as a small boy, I can't have been more than 6 or so, maybe 7. And I went to visit the home of 3 teachers who lived down the road from where my father was in England by then. And these 3 teachers were living in this house. And I don't remember why I went to see them. But I was surprised to the point of being shocked that at home they were talking patois. Because I thought that everybody broadly like us, slightly upper working class or middle class, but educated, spoke English at home like we did. But by no means everybody did. And these teachers who were teaching English and functioning in English in the Buff Bay Elementary School, where I was, were speaking patois at home, rightly so.
No, absolutely.
The middle classes know and understand and speak patois.
Yes. You know, the interesting thing is because I even me being raised in England, I heard elders say, you know, for talk bad, yeah, when you're speaking patois.
Yeah.
And I have to give thanks to because I spoke to somebody the other day, and they were saying to me, yeah, I love listening to your show, Shakara. But you know one thing when I love about you, you never left the patois alone. You never run left the patois, yeah. And I have to give thanks to my father and Miss Lou, yeah, you know what I'm saying, and all of my Jamaican and Montserratian friends that I went to school with. You know what I'm saying? Because for challenging elders when they said to me, for talk, so right, you know what I'm saying, and all of these things. Because that was a thing that for talk them way they talk it. That's what they call it, talking bad. You know what I'm saying?
Well, again, how Jamaica operated, because again, as older now, maybe 11 or 12, and we're in the back of the church, which was also the school, which is where we were at that time, a school run by the Baptist minister. And we're out in the yard playing and talking in Jamaican, because you don't do English when you're playing.
Yes.
And this woman, who was one of the teachers, shouts out from the balcony veranda, Cecil, your English is atrocious. But we weren't talking English. It was a playground.
Yes.
Conversing in patois.
Oh, yes.
And so what she was in effect saying is that out there playing, Jamaican young children playing, and you should be talking English there as well. Not a thing of a muscle. Almost nowhere in Jamaica did they insist that away from the formal places in which it happens, you must speak English. And all Jamaicans who have any sense and any contact with Jamaica speak patois.
Yes, sir. All right. Long comment now from Bala. Well, it's not that long. It's just a few different things. I'll read it for you. The retention, preservations, and refining of African cultural expressions and production in diasporas requires measuring technologies and scales. Okay. How is Africanity measured? How accurate are those measurements? And what damage is accrued when things are mismeasured, either in incorporating non-African things into African cultural sphere or omitting others that should be admitted into it? So do you want me to read that again?
Not really. So I don't know why the notion measurement is so important to this brother. We're talking about a domain of culture, essentially what us Africans and our ancestors have done by way of social practice, linguistic practice, religious practice, culinary practice, to consciously or otherwise keep African culture alive in our neck of the woods. That's what we're talking about. And there's no need to measure that. There's a need to understand it and analyze it properly. And there are books that attempt to do that. Kamal Brathwaite, big poet, historian, social critic. His work, no measurement in it. It's assessment of the folk culture of the Jamaican slave. It's assessment of he delivered a wonderful lecture in Barbados. He's from there, but he spent a lot of his time in Jamaica and then in America, foreign. But he delivers. I have it somewhere. I'll probably try to give you a copy.
Yes, sir.
The extraordinary exploration of his African-Bayesian evolution in Barbados as a child and a young man. Extraordinary document. Just how, despite the fact that Bimshire is supposed to be Little England, the extent to which Bimshire was actually fundamentally African. in part because the white people didn't mix, and the black people had to find ways of surviving, and the survival was both economic and cultural, and consciously and otherwise. The extent to which that cultural survival was explicitly African is what Kamal brings out in that extraordinary long lecture that he did.
Maybe we need an explanation of what or some clarity in terms of what measurement means. Yeah.
Well,
but if I tap into the spirit, go on.
No, if the person who wrote that is on, I can see a part 2. Does part 2 address that?
I read it. No.
Oh,
I read it all.
No,
yeah.
I'm sure the person listening.
Maybe though.
And if they can maybe write in a little bit more, or even come on and talk.
Yes.
That'd be good. But I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't think measurement as such comes into it. And the danger. Sorry, you mentioned the danger of things that are not African becoming or being mistaken for African. I don't know the extent to which there is any such danger, but we Africans have creatively incorporated stuff from Europe in some very good ways. Fela Kuti incorporated stuff from African America and from Europe in his music, and you can do that. And if you do it as a creative African, it becomes part of African cultural output.
I think you're correct. I think obviously cultures always speak to each other and adopt things from each other. That's one thing that always happens. Yes. I think if I tap into the spirit, and this is not me speaking for Bala, but you did mention earlier, Elder Cecil, about when we after we played the song, about the fact that there are, well, you mentioned two things. You mentioned the extent to which we see carnival through a European lens, Greco-European lens, Greco-Roman European lens, in fact, right? And then there was the issue of the slackness and the fact that we recognize the dance forms and so on and so forth, but because it's voided of its cultural context, it manifests in a particular kind of way. And then some people say, well, some people say more lazily than the brother who wrote the song that this is African, without without the allusion to the cultural context and that critical lens that will not allow us to, because sometimes when people say that, it's an excuse for not going further with the analysis, if that makes sense. So we're effectively, one could argue that we're adopting a Eurocentric commodification of the body, so to speak, within our culture, with an African form, but with a European mentality. If I'm tapping into the spirit of what he's saying, maybe that might be an example of it, or two examples.
No, I mean that sounds right to me. The problem is, isn't it, that African culture has, as an integrated cultural reality, both the carnal and the spiritual, and the carnal is spiritual. Carnal is part of spirituality, and you get that in dance, you get it in song, and because it's properly integrated and in its context seems natural, there's nothing wrong. But at the point at which the cultural content disappears, the cultural context disappears, and you get left with just gyrating bodies, half naked, it leaves us in a difficulty, because the dances might still be, and frequently are, African, but they are African without African context or African cultural content. And I think it is true. It's part of the same problem that the best example, the small example that I have, and I hope it's correct, is that in our nine-night tradition in Jamaica, the people used to sing religious songs, Sankeys, whatever, and they also used to sing some dirty songs, so-called, right? And the dirty songs, as I understand it, represented, consciously or otherwise, but represented the fact that the passing of someone, which is what you're celebrating and mourning at a nine-night, that person can't be recreated and replaced in the community without the sexual reproduction. And both of those things were actually in the nine-night. And but if you don't understand that, so it's that detachment from the contextual framework that puts what looks like slackness into.
No, I get it. 100%, and I agree. It occurs to me that another example might be the use of Catholic iconography, in voodoo tradition in Haiti. You know what I'm saying? But that's another subject for another time. So we're not forgetting that today. Because I'm going to plan a conversation on that subject specifically. Well, on Haiti voodoo specifically. So we'll go into that. But yeah, there are some examples out there. The Talawa as the media, the part of the indigenous thing is a Negroish response to continentalist misunderstandings of Africanity. I'm not even sure I agree with that. I think that I'm not even going to go into that today, but except to say that, well, I'm not even sure what you mean. Because I don't think it's inspired by what things that continentalist Africans say. I think that things that continentalist Africans say that are ignorant is used as an excuse for denial of Africanness and trying to claim indigenousness to the Americas. But I don't think it's the reason. Yeah, so I know what you mean, but I'm not sure I agree. But we can converse about that another time. And Talawa also says the issue of the golden issue also shows the absence of a black first political objective. He's referring to the Golden, the Mark Golden issue that Sister Kabu raised. I think that's it for the comments. Let me just check if I've missed anything. Oh, you're saying that was a question. Okay, so yeah, I think I've answered it. I'm not sure how familiar you are, Elder Sister, with social media dynamics at the moment, but there's a lot of diaspora wars, as they refer to, on social media, and so Talawa was speculating as to whether Africans in the Americas trying to claim Aboriginal identity is in part a response to non-enlightened things that Africans from the continent say, and I was saying I'm not sure I agree with that, because the anti-Africanness in the Americas pre-existed anything that we would have heard continental Africans say. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Some of the stuff that's coming out of apparently serious African American thinking at the moment alarms me.
Yes.
One of them is that effort to say that North American Africans didn't come from Africa, but are indigenous people. And that strikes me as just fundamentally nonsensical. It's unhistorical, etc., etc., etc. And that it can be run and taken seriously says something about how detached people can become from the reality of their own history, and how the quest for, I don't know, an alternative reality, what that can drive people into. So that alarms me, and it really doesn't rise above nonsense because there's no historical support for it, historical informational support for it. The other thing
go on.
The other thing that worries me, and this one worries me more, is the ADOS argument, which is American descendants of slavery. And what they appear to be doing is trying to make the US slavery experience, enslavement experience, the one unique thing about them. And that also is extraordinarily ahistorical. It's ahistorical because the enslavements of Africans in the Americas were generally much of a muchness. The system was similar everywhere of enslavement, and it was similar even if the main activity, the product, was diamond production, gold production, or sugarcane or cotton or whatever, brutal regimes, etc., etc., etc. So the distinctive thing about North America isn't the enslavement experience at all. It's actually what happened afterwards, where Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction politics, where the whites forced the people who liberated themselves and had gained a place on the political stage, were forced back off it by brutality of the worst kind, including that whole lynching thing and so on, that terrorized African Americans into a kind of submission. So that is right. That experience, including the Ku Klux Klan and all of that stuff, is what is different between the Caribbean and North America. Is what's different between Brazil and North America. It's what's different between Cuba and North America. Only in North America did that. Not that the post-enslavement regimes.
Elder Stephen, though, they would make a version of the argument. Some of them would, in terms of identifying the uniqueness of the American experience, which is not something that I necessarily have a problem with. The issue that I have is that in doing that, there's often a lack of understanding and even a denial about what took place in other places in the Americas post-enslavement. So the conditions that produce a Paul Bogle, for example, they would argue are non-existent. That basically everybody else got, you have
to show me that they're interested in what happened in Brazil or in Jamaica.
No, they're not. That's the point. They're not interested because they would learn
after enslavement, and so it is not that the plantocracy in Jamaica after 1838 were nice people. They clearly were not. But what they didn't do, unlike whites in the United States of America, was set up a terror regime.
No, of course.
Against Africans, and that terror regime is the uniqueness of the U.S. Black experience in the post-emancipation period, and it is post-emancipation. The enslavement system was relatively similar.
Absolutely. There's a few more, and I want to wrap up soon, so we're going to get through these quickly. In response, but Bala says, in response to the point on Africanity being defined as Caribbean, there is an ontological truth in their in there that is not necessarily self-recognizable, but maybe it is an intrinsically African trait, i.e., there is no need for Africans to affirm Africanity if it's expressed naturally. Therefore, recognize the political as separate from embodied at times in these dynamics. No, I don't. I'm not sure I understand your last sentence, but I don't disagree with. I don't disagree with the point that you've made in principle. Yeah.
Mhm.
The problem is that the recognition or the affirmation of Caribbean often comes with a denial. Yes. Of the African and the African identity. So if one said Caribbean, and it was generally understood that when we say Caribbean, we're referring to ourselves as African in the Caribbean, it wouldn't be a problem. Yeah. But when you define Caribbean as oppositional to African, that's what I'm referring to.
No, I hear you. And I think that people like you and me, us African Caribbean, have to say African Caribbean when we mean African Caribbean.
Yeah.
And it's important in relation to our creative past, to our present, to reparations, to the politics of who runs Jamaica. That Mark Golding thing is about how it comes to be that the political parties in Jamaica have pushed Africans out of the political arena to the extent that both parties now have that brown or white leadership. That's a matter of importance, and we got no framework for particularly discussing it, and we got the idiotics of white men effectively saying that they're black.
But that had gone from the birth of the nation, Elder Sesu.
No. They said they're Jamaican, but
I take your point.
Yeah, it's like South Africans, South Africans wanting to claim not South Africanness but African.
Yeah.
And I encountered a very sharp example of it in Namibia when I was there in about 2005. We, just as Harold Cruz was making the point about the importance of the defense of African American culture by African Americans, United States now, and of United States Africans being the one people in that place with a genuine cultural achievement to defend.
Yes.
He makes that point, and he's right. Us African-Caribbean people have a duty to recognize that we have a duty to defend ourselves quite assertively, even aggressively, but certainly assertively in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. It is nonsensical to allow the debate around reparations to be talking about reparations as if the reparations isn't only for Africans as the only ones who suffered enslavement. Converting a 90% island community into something that is out of many one, and then disappear the 90% inside of that it's very disturbing.
I agree.
And so I don't think we should allow ourselves the indulgence of making Caribbean interchangeable with African Caribbean, because it's not, and it actually endangers the African of the Caribbean when that happens.
100%, absolutely. Let me see. There's a couple more. Hold on.
One further comment though. Inside of that question, the brother or sister was making it has a point, and it reminded me of something that somebody said. When negritude was being discussed, Somebody said, right, that this negritude not thing is nonsense. That the tiger does not declare its tigritude. I don't know if you remember that statement. And there's something in it, accepting that whilst the tiger expresses its tigritude by being tiger, in order to be African, we as humans, African humans, have to say something about our Africanity in order for it to be properly expressed and to be known to us, let alone to others. So, because we are speaking, writing, intelligent human beings in
100%.
an ideological and cultural context that is almost 100% negative about us.
That is one of the most definitive points that Walter Rodney makes in Groundings, with my brothers, that we need to assert a blackness and an Africanness, unapologetically in that regard. He even go as far as to say that the powers that be would prefer you to come and talk about class, and communism.
Well,
you know what I'm saying? That race and blackness.
That is so. And I think that one of the sessions that I had was it here, where I was talking about what they have done with delegitimating all talk of race, when they still run the world on the basis of race. And the drive against China is racist because Euro-America doesn't wish to be second. To some people who are not Euro-America.
Absolutely. Talawa says, I think we need to have an African-centered framework in how we analyze our things. Agreed. Millerman says, agreed, because there is also an indigenous Abo movement in JA2. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. So I've come across a couple of those brothers and sisters. And a lot of the Maroons are adopting the argument as well, in order to distinguish themselves from the rest of the African population.
I think
Bala is saying that that's a Wallace Oyinka quote that on the tigritude.
I think it was him. Yes. And you know what what's his name does to him in his book on African literature. What's his name?
Aikrama?
No.
Ngugi?
No, one more. It's the brother who did the West and the rest of us.
Oh yeah, Chinwezu.
Yes. Chinwezu also has some literary stuff. And the assault on our man who just named there, Soinka, is deep and sharp and wonderful.
as Chinwezu usually is. Although I can't claim to have read his critique of Wallace, so I need to correct that. It seems that Bala has, so you need to share that with me. You know what I'm saying? So all right. I think we've got through the comments there. Elder Cecil. So we give thanks for that, So it's an important point. Smaditisation. Smaditisation is the subject, Elder Cecil. And it occurs to me that it's impossible for us to Smaditize whilst we are in denial of our Africanness, or in a state of lack of recognition.
It's an African smaddiness.
That's right. You know what I mean? To be or not to be. There's a whole conversation about even when you say what did I say? Where might he be? And then I say, if no, nobody really mighty. Right? But there's a whole that subject of the use of that be how we use it in our languages is a whole linguistic subject. Yeah, there's a technical term for it, but I can't remember it now. Talawa will be able to say because he's a linguist. But you know, what terms like be and de, like when somebody in a relationship is saying them de, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And all of these things. There's a ontological there's an ontological dimension, yeah, to that sensibility and how we use it in the language, you know. So we give thanks. All right, so give thanks once again, as always, for you coming through and expanding upon this topic.
Yes,
you know.
And on the next occasion, it may be that we should announce it that I want to do something on how mistaken African attitudes are to the United Nations setup.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting one, brothers and sisters, because we hear enough talk about the UN decade of people of African descent, and they're trying to extend the decade and all of these things.
Pure foolishness, never come from the first one.
Well, we're going to talk about that. So, brothers and sisters, we're going to get into the United, and people that I love and respect, you know, are very caught up in these things. People
exactly.
That, you know, that are doing valuable work. You know what I'm saying? I have no problem with them otherwise in terms of the work that they're doing.
I couldn't agree with you more about and that's why it's so distressing, because good people, good African activists are pursuing this chimera, and it's not an innocent chimera; it's a deadly one. Yes.
All right, so we'll give thanks. You know what I'm saying? We'll let you go now. Much appreciated. And so once you look down a date, brothers and sisters, you know when that one is coming. All right. Give thanks.
Great to be with you, my brother, and I hope the viewers got a little bit of something of what we were trying to say.
Yes, I give thanks, elder sister. Much appreciated. All right, give thanks. Then don't worry, brothers and sisters. Give elder sister some black power fist in the chat. Some black power fist in the chat if you've appreciated his pronouncements and his sharings for us today. I is unapologetic in I affirmation of I Africanness. We're now beg nothing. When it comes to these things, brothers and sisters, we're now big not a friend when it comes to these things, because we know that there is an attack on these vibrations right about now. And so we want to make it clear that we are African and proud, and the fact that we hail directly from the Caribbean is no diminishment of our Africanness, because any culture where we create as African people from and within ourselves is in fact African culture. And it takes nothing away from us to recognize and affirm that. Someone want to believe, say, when you say we are African, you discredit to Smadi years other than yourself when you say them thing there. That is foolishness and nonsense, brothers and sisters. So let's be clear about these things. Let's be clear about these things. All right. I'm gonna let you know about a few things in a second, but let me just give you this first and foremost. All on there.
Kush Communiversity is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, The Black Secret. Are you ready to dive deep into Black history, economics, wealth building, and self-empowerment? The Black Secret is offering exclusive courses by none other than the Black history man himself, Robin Walker. This is the most powerful Black studies course on offer for the entire Black world. And guess what? You can get started today by simply using our special link, which you can find in the video description. Be sure to apply our coupon code Kimbunga to get another 20% off your membership. And there's more. Want to get a taste of what the Black Secret has to offer? You can also claim the book 100 Black History Facts absolutely free. Link in the description. So what are you waiting for? Expand your mind, unlock a world of knowledge, claim your free book, and let the Black Secret guide you on a journey of discovery and empowerment.
Click on the link below or subscribe to get more information. Class is in session.
Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. The Kush Communiversity is sponsored by the Black Secret, which is run by the People's Professor, the Black history man himself, Robin Walker, who is the presenter on the latest episode of The Return of Kush Communiversity. He is ministering on the empire of ancient Ghana. It is, though, with pleasure that I inform you that our next episode, our next installment of the Kush Communiversity will feature Brother Dalian Adofo, brothers and sisters. Yes, indeed, providing an introduction to African spirituality. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. Yeah, so do stay tuned for that. Do stay tuned for that at the end of the month. Want to send a special shout out to the name of the elder, Baba Achiaba Adaye Sebo, who, because we are in the month of Black History Month, I celebrated in the UK, brothers and sisters. So more on that in time to come during the month, more on that soon. Very, very important that we acknowledge the history of the history, that we are creating in this country. And too many of us still believe that the observance of Black History Month was given to us by some people other than ourselves. And so it's necessary to reiterate, every year that Black History Month was in fact created by the community, even though, as many things are, co-opted by the forces and powers that be, brothers and sisters. So let's make the people them know all the thing go. And I want to share with you the flyer for our next installment of the Kush Communiversity, which is featuring Brother Dalian Adofo of Ancestral Voices. So introduction to African spirituality, brothers and sisters, being released on the 30th of October. So do stay tuned for the next episode of the Kush Communiversity featuring Dalian Adofo, and you're gonna get one a month. So scholars can't done, I'm saying scholars can't done, brothers and sisters. We're gonna be breaking down African spirituality. We touched on some matters in our show with Brother Black Panther last week as well, so do check that one out. But Brother Dalian Adofo is going to get into African spirituality from an African spiritual perspective, because it is important for us to challenge and negate and reject the propaganda of white power, Western colonialism, Western imperialism, and Abrahamic religion as it relates to African spirituality, brothers and sisters. It's noted that there are people who adhere to spiritual systems. The institutions of their spiritual systems are known for mass murder, raping, pillaging, and enslavement of other people. Yet they feel they have the moral authority, to question, judge, and demonize indigenous African spiritual systems who have not committed anything anywhere near the crimes that these people have committed. So we want to make sure that we correct the record, and Brother Dalian Adofo is going to assist us in doing so, brothers and sisters. Want to encourage you to pick up your war report via the link to the description in the video. Link to the description in the video, brothers and sisters, for the war report. You can get it absolutely free right about now. And we're coming your way on the 12th of October for the African Survival Initiative Roundtable, the U.S. government versus Black people, brothers and sisters. We're going to be looking at the U.S. domestic policy as it affects and is going to continue to affect African people in America after the coming election. So you do want to check that out. Stay tuned. But we're coming to you on the 12th of October. Our postponement date is the 12th of October, brothers and sisters, as we were supposed to go live with this on the 28th of September. On the 26th of October, we will be coming to you again with the African Survival Initiative, but this time looking at foreign policy. So this coming show is on domestic policy. The following show will be on foreign policy, brothers and sisters. So do stay tuned and tune in for that. We look forward to you joining us for both of those shows. I believe I've gotten through all of the announcements. So we give thanks once again for you joining us. And with that, we say unto thee, Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Mudzimo Mukulu. We give praises unto our ancestors because our ancestors are worthy to be praised. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Why are we all of a sudden having crisis in identity? At the very moment, we also talked about what? Afrocentrism and African what? Centeredness. So right at this moment, when we are beginning to coalesce and to develop a concept of African identity and Afrocentrism, we are all now suddenly in a what? Identity crisis. Is the identity crisis really there, or is what going on an attempt to do what? Create an identity crisis? Because these people are well aware of what a full and wholesome identity will do to them, and they are aware that an African-centered identity represents the end of white power and of white oppression.
Hello, this is Robin Walker. I'm the Black History Man. This is Kush Communiversity, and class is in session. The presentation is called The West African Empire of Ghana. The ruler of Ghana was the richest king on the face of the earth. West Africa is the center of where it's at in terms of economic activity on the earth. West Africa is where it's at.
Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Tantewa, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm going to build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we got to go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you, that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp, and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the Ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.